Well, it's a little difficult to say how the rescue efforts will pan out because all we have right now is a draft reconstruction scheme drawn up by the Reserve Bank of India, which envisages State Bank of India taking a 49% stake in the bank. So it's a little difficult to say how it will pan out. There are 2 or 3 scenarios I could think of. One is, of course, that the State Bank investment does not help at all and Yes Bank continues to deteriorate. And ultimately, we'll have to think in terms of a merger with State Bank of India, because liquidation of a bank is not like liquidation of any non-bank, not like liquidation of a corporate entity. There are issues of systemic stability, there are issues of financial stability, confidence, and it could impact the entire banking system and the economic system as a whole, as we saw in the case of the US, where it allowed Lehman Brothers to go down in 10 years, down the line, more than 10 years. We are still feeling the consequences of that. So you really cannot afford to let a bank go down, which is why in the case of banks, there is this philosophy of too big to fail. Yes Bank, as the 4th largest private sector lender, cannot be allowed to go down. So I think there would be no question of it being liquidated or being allowed to go over the cliff, as the finance minister said. So either it will work out and SBI will, as Rajneesh Kumar, the chairman of State Bank of India, in his press conference just concluded, said that State Bank of India has normally never lost money when all its ventures, whenever it has made an investment. And he quoted the example of SBI Cards, SBI Life. He says SBI has always done well for itself. So there's no need for SBI to wonder whether it is making a mistake. Of course, I think he has said that because of criticism that SBI has been forced to take it over. But nevertheless, he did make that assertion that SBI is unlikely to lose. It is a wise investment. So if it works out, Yes Bank will be back on its feet. Maybe not immediately, a couple of years perhaps, because one must remember that part of Yes Bank's problem is also because the economy at large is going through a slowdown. And Yes Bank was a very aggressive lender. It lent to a large number of corporates, many of which have turned NPA. So in one scenario, the optimistic scenario is that Yes Bank is back on its feet and becomes a successful bank once again. The other scenario is where Yes Bank does not do well, these efforts do not succeed, and finally SBI is forced to take over Yes Bank. So these, I think, are the 2 broad scenarios that I can think of. Well, I would not think it a very smart move, really, to the extent that Yes Bank's problems were known earlier. So if it was really a strategic investment in which SBI saw value, as Mr. Rajneesh Kumar claims now, SBI might have made a move a little earlier. I think this, to my mind, this is the government's attempt to see that a large bank does not go down under. And since the present government is hesitant about any kind of move which would smack of taxpayer money being used, they thought this is a wiser or a smarter, quote-unquote, move to have SBI step in. So frankly, it comes to the same, because SBI also is a majority government-owned bank. It is a use of taxpayer money. And in fact, I would prefer that whenever there is rescues to be done, it is done outrightly with taxpayer money, because this is a move which is very unfair to SBI's minority shareholders. At a time when government is thinking of disinvesting in its own public sector undertakings, when the government tends to use government majority-owned institutions to do things at its behest, it sends a very wrong example. We saw the case of LIC being forced to merge with, take over IDBI Bank. Now we're seeing SBI being forced, quote-unquote, to take a stake in Yes Bank. So minority shareholders, there is a feeling that they are being taken for granted. And that might send a wrong signal at a time when government is looking to get in minority shareholders in many of its public sector undertakings. So yes, it's a smart move in the sense that it bails out Yes Bank at a critical moment, but it's not such a smart move from a long-term perspective for a government that is looking to disinvest its stake in large public sector undertakings. Well, as I said, all distressed businesses cannot be compared to banks. Banks are a completely different kettle of fish altogether. They are neither fish nor fowl. So, which is why no government anywhere in the world, and this is true equally of the US, where during the post-2008 crisis, the US government used the TARP to bail out many large banks, in fact, including non-banks also. But in the Indian context, I think so far we have not really bailed out non-banks as such. Of course, Maruti Suzuki, to go back far, far back, yes, the government did bail out an automobile company, but that, of course, was for political reasons. But in the case of banks, any large bank, the government will automatically almost always come to its rescue, both abroad as well as in India. So if we come across any large bank which gets into trouble similarly, I will not rule out the possibility. But for the moment, I think we have a large number of small banks, and the government has in the past, the RBI has in the past allowed small cooperative banks to go down under. So this need not necessarily be taken as a hint for future action. But yes, if it is a large enough bank, governments all over the world do come to the rescue, and that would be equally true of India as well. Well, yes, there could be a crisis of confidence, definitely among the depositors of small banks. And as in the post-2008 crisis, we could see a flight of deposits from small banks to the nationalized banks particularly. But to the extent that the government has come up with this, or rather the RBI has come up with this draft scheme, it perhaps will assuage the fears of depositors. But to my mind, it could have been better managed. Had the RBI imposed a moratorium and simultaneously come up with this draft restructuring scheme, there would have been less anxiety, less panic among the depositors. Because all said and done, the fact is that this is hard-earned money of ordinary depositors. And if you are told for whatever reason that you cannot withdraw more than 50,000 rupees in a month for the period of the moratorium, there is bound to be panic. So had the RBI come out with this scheme almost instantaneously or simultaneously said, look, we are imposing a moratorium because it will take time to work out the details of the restructuring scheme, but this is a restructuring scheme and SBI is going to take in a 49% stake, you would not have seen people rush to Yes Bank to withdraw their money. Even now, when the moratorium is lifted, we might see a rush. But to the extent that State Bank of India is a well-respected bank, government is the majority shareholder even now in SBI, that might quell the fears. But as far as smaller private sector banks are concerned, I think fears will remain. Depositors will be wary of putting their money in that. Another time when we are encouraging entry of new banks into the banking space, I think they will have to fight an uphill battle. Well, the government has made it very clear that as far as public sector banks are concerned, they would like a few large banks. So I think consolidation, and we're already seeing the moves where the government has merged 10 large public sector banks and brought them down to 4. So we will see government continue that effort as far as public sector banks is concerned. As far as private sector banks are concerned, on the one hand, we do see entry of small finance banks, payments banks. So these are essentially small banks. But amongst the old private sector banks, we have a large number of old private sector banks. You might see some move to consolidate because everybody knows that once you become too large to fail, you will not be allowed to fail. So there will be this, undercurrent of a desire to become too large. So that once you become too large, the fact is in the banking industry, whether you're publicly owned or privately owned, ultimately taxpayer money is always brought in to bail you out. So that really is the moral hazard that we talk about in the case of banking.